Welcome to the Legacy All-Stars podcast. We feature inspirational stories from people who dedicate themselves to helping others. Here is your host, Alan Pavlosky.
All right. Welcome back to the Legacy All-Stars podcast. I'm your host, Alan Pavlosky. Today's guest is someone whose story is about far more than athletic achievement. Mark Pattison spent 8 years as a wide receiver in the NFL, suiting up for the Raiders, Rams, and Saints. But what he chose to do with his life after football is where the real legacy begins. When many would have coasted through past success, Mark has set one of the most audacious goals imaginable: to climb the 7 summits, the highest peak on every continent. Over the course of a decade, he did exactly that, becoming the first NFL player in history to complete the challenge, capping it with the summit of Mount Everest on May 23rd, 2021. NFL 360 captured that journey in a documentary called Searching for the Summit, which went on to win a Sports Emmy Award for Best Short Documentary in 2022. And there it is. Hold it up, Mark, proudly.
There it is. It's cool.
But here's what makes Mark a perfect fit for Legacy All-Stars. It's not just the climbing, it's not the football, it's what he does with his platform. Mark has raised money for causes he believes in, including Higher Ground in Sun Valley, Idaho, a nonprofit that holds deep personal meaning because of his daughter Amelia's journey with epilepsy. He calls it Passion with a Purpose for Amelia's Everest. He is a #1 Amazon best-selling author of Finding Your Summit, a former senior vice president at Sports Illustrated, who led the brand from 17 to #1 in the market, a sought-after keynote speaker, and the creator of 7 Summit, a leadership event built to help others find their next mountain. Mark, great to have you. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed it. I love talking about this stuff, and it's a passion. You know, we're not talking about pouring cement or something like that. We're talking about really personal achievement, elite leadership, mindset, resilience, and at the end of the day, trying to either inspire or help others.
Yeah, you know what? The reason I started this show is because after spending 30 years plus in sports and working with athletes, I was most inspired by those that gave of themselves and really moved to help others. And I think the main purpose behind this show is to inspire others to get off the sidelines and make a difference. So with that in mind, let's get started with the questions.
Yeah.
Mark, 8 years in the NFL, Raiders, Rams, Saints. Paint a picture for our audience of what life was like the moment football was over, and what did that transition feel like?
Yeah, it was tough, man. It was especially tough because, like so many things, sports, you're seeing the NIL and all these other things that are happening today. Really, the whole landscape is changing. Back then, there were no programs. And so if you dial this back, and I don't think a lot of people think about things like this, but the money isn't what we see today. So you're not like set for life, but that's a whole nother conversation. But when you ended the game of football, which really started back when I was like 7 years old, right? And like you and like so many others, you know, you're just going out in the playground and you're playing with your buddies and you're having a great time. And then one thing leads to another and you keep going up the ladder and it gets steeper and steeper and steeper. And then once you get into big time college football, which I was very fortunate to play at kind of a golden era time at the University of Washington. And we went to bowls every year, Rose Bowls, Orange Bowl, you know, all kinds of stuff. And then you find your way in the NFL. You're like, that's a long time at like high octane football, right? And you put all your blood, sweat, and tears into that. And then one day it just ends. And when it ends, it ends. You know, when you're playing, you're relevant. And when you're not, you're not. And so that's what happened to me. Today, there's a gal named Tracy Perlman with the NFL.
Yeah, I know Tracy.
Tracy, yeah, with the NFLPA. And she's done a phenomenal job of really creating this program called the Trust. And so the Trust is 10,000 plus NFL guys, ex-NFL guys like me, who are in the Players Union, and they've created all these programs. So a program might be a coaching seminar. It might be going to Merrill Lynch and shadowing somebody. It might somebody want to be a broadcaster. You go to broadcasting school. So there's all these different things and all these different verticals of these opportunities to actually take somebody's energy and skill set and interest and then chase those down. But going back to your question, that wasn't the way it was back in the day. So this is the whole thing, you know, about many of these things that you just named, you know, running Sports Illustrated. I also started 2 venture-backed companies and, you know, I've won the Emmy and just came out with this book called Finding Your Summit. And, you know, it's really about the valleys of how we climb out of those things with faith and resilience. And that was a big valley that I had to climb out of. And it took me probably 2 years. And it was tough. And because I had no skill sets, I had no experience in anything other than catching footballs. And that didn't really translate to other corporations. And I had to learn, like, what are you going to bring a value to somebody else that they would want to actually hire you? So it was a tough transition.
Yeah, for sure. Most people who decide to reinvent themselves set a reasonable goal. You decided to climb the highest mountain on every continent. Where did that come from? And other than me, who thought you were crazy?
Well, a lot of people not only thought I was crazy, but thought I was very selfish, right? And selfish from the standpoint. And I want to just put the context and the timeline of this, because this is really, I played football and then I had to figure out life, and then ultimately got married and I had kids. And now this is 15, 20 years later, 20 years later, going from when football ended for me, which was around 30 years old, to now at 50, I'm going through this life transition of my now ex didn't want to be married anymore, which we're on great terms and everything now, but that transition. And so I just really need to find that big, hairy, audacious goal to figure out something that was going to pull me out of this zone. It was a little bit in a different way, like when the death of my NFL career. And now I'm going through this major relationship transition where it couldn't be something like, hey, Mark, just go run a 10K or something, which is very doable for anybody, whether you walk it or run it, or even a marathon, which would be difficult for me. But since I'd grown up in the state of Washington, we've got mountains up there. We've got a big one called Mount Rainier. You probably know of it. It's kind of like Mount Shasta down by where you are. And, when I climbed that, and this whole idea came around about, has there ever been an NFL player ever try to climb the 7 summits? And at the time, the answer is no. And so, of course, the 7 summits are the highest peak on each continent. So, between the travel and how you get there, and like, how do you pull this thing off, and rock climb and glacier climb and get yourself out of a crevasse, which I fell on a couple of times, right? It's all these things. And it just got me excited about life again. And it really did help me pull myself out of this rut that I found myself in around 50 years old.
Yeah. Take us through the decade-long arc of the 7 summits. Which mountain tested you the most, and not necessarily just physically?
Yeah, look, each one's got its own thing to it, and each one is unique in terms of where it is. And the globe is set up where our summer is somebody else's winter and vice versa. So there's a whole time of season when you go attack all these. Every one, from a chronological standpoint, had its own kind of timeline and its challenge. And I would say that Denali was super physically taxing in the sense that that's up in Alaska now, called, I think, Mount McKinley. But it's taxing just because you're pulling your own stuff up there, and you're up there for almost 3 weeks. So you're talking about 137 pounds on a sled and on your back. And that's tough. And it's steep. And because you've got the Bering Sea out there, which sits in between the states, Alaska and Russia, you've got this really cold, like AC wind and weather that comes down. And the first time I tried to take that on in 2017, we got pushed back. It was actually minus 90 degrees on the top, and we were 2 camps below that. And, just being buried in a tent for 5 days is hard. And getting all that gear up to this camp at 14,200 feet was a challenge. But I have to say, like, when you wrap it all together, Mount Everest is just a whole another level. And the main reason, beyond just being almost 30,000 feet, and there's dead bodies on the mountain, and you're in the death zone, and you're breathing on oxygen. One thing I don't think a lot of people really understand is that you're there on the mountain, living on ice and rock at 17,500 feet for 2 months, right? 2 months at 17,000. The top of Mount Rainier, this mountain I just referenced in the state of Washington, is 14,500 feet. That's the top. That's where you think, I've been up Mount Whitney a couple times. That's 14,000. I think that's the second highest mountain, or it's the highest mountain in the lower 48. So anyways, I see you coughing a little bit. And that's one of the things that you also get when you're climbing on Everest, is something called the Kumba cough. And so there's all these particles in the air, and you're in the death zone, and your body is deteriorating, and you just come up with these little ailments like this. It's just one of those things. But when you're up there, you don't heal. You get a little cut, you're not going to heal. You've got a little cough or something like that, you're not getting over it, right? So you got to manage all these little tiny things that make a big difference. And, we started, and mindset is a lot part, we can talk about that later, but, we started with 24 people, and only 10 of us made it. And, typically when the odds of people making it, not making it, it's a steep curve of actually trying to get up there.
Yeah. NFL 360 followed you on Everest and turned it into an Emmy Award-winning documentary.
Yeah.
What was it like having a camera in your face on the world's most dangerous mountain?
Well, I'll tell you what happened is I get a call. This is timing is everything in life. And I've had a lot of circumstances. And this really speaks to me about when the universe, and you can phrase it however you want, but is ready to like set you free or bring certain gifts to you or things like this. And this was another great example of this, which was in 2020, we were scheduled to go climb Mount Everest. I had paid for it. I had an expedition group. And as you remember, around March was about the time that you head off to Nepal. The whole world shut down because of COVID. And as a result of that, everything got pushed from here to there. So now it's 2021. And prior to that, there's a number of people that said, hey, Mark, you should do a film on this. You've got this cool stuff going on. And yeah, so I went after that, but I discovered that it's like $1 million to pull that off, right? With getting cameramen and production and all that stuff, which I know nothing about. So I get a call from the NFL in January 2021, and they go, hey, Mark, look, we'd love to do a short film on you climbing Mount Everest on your Everest expedition. Do you want to do that? And I go, of course. So they flew up a crew over to Sun Valley, Idaho, and we did a lot of filming. There's another guy you probably know, Jim Mora Jr. He's my best friend. There's a lot of filming of us talking and then climbing mountains around here in Sun Valley, Idaho at 6,000 feet. And that's where I did all my training. But when it came to going over, so now this is January, and fast forward a couple months, now we're late March, we're headed over to Nepal. There had been another outbreak of COVID in India, and India borders Nepal. And so NFL security was banning anybody, employees, for going over to Nepal. So They flew back over to Sun Valley, and they equipped me with all kinds of GoPros. And so I had GoPros here. So every time I just start off, I just push buttons on my chest and my head, and off I go. And so I captured like 10,000 hours of film, of which I had no idea whatever I was going. But, once you push a button, your focus is on the crevasse and climbing through the Kumai's Fall and going across these crazy ladders and all this kind of stuff. And so I didn't really know. Here's the funny thing about all this is that, so then they put it together and it's this beautiful film, and it's a 30-minute documentary. And so in May of 2022, I get a call again from the NFL after it had come out, and it was great. It was amazing. And they go, hey, Mark, great news. You've just been nominated for an Emmy. And I'm like, Emmy for what? I had no clue what they were talking about. And they go, you've been nominated for Best Picture or Film, and also for Best Cinematography. So all that stuff I took up on, which I had no idea I was taking, I fell into a crevasse, and that was all captured and everything else. It's called Searching for the Summit, if anybody wants to know, on YouTube. But I captured all this stuff. I didn't win for Best Cinematography, but the grand prize, of course, is Best Picture, which we won.
Yeah, that's amazing. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what you do for others. And you've raised money for causes including Higher Ground in Sun Valley. Tell us about that organization and how your daughter Amelia's journey with epilepsy shaped your commitment to giving back.
It actually started with the Epilepsy Foundation out of Houston. This is where their base is. And then it shifted to Higher Ground here in Sun Valley. I've also raised money for the Boys and Girls Club out of LA. And I've also this was really cool, my second Kilimanjaro trip. Actually, I grabbed Jim Moore along with this, but there's a collection of NFL players and ex-military guys with disability. And Jim Moore and I actually raised enough money to build a water well down in Tanzania, which was really rewarding. It was really cool down in Serengeti. We got to go visit and see what that was like for them and see the joy and the happiness out of just being able to turn on a water faucet, and have water come out. Right. But going back to Sun Valley, let's start with my daughter. I just did a TED Talk on this, which was really cool. And it's kind of like, what's the blessing and what are when things like this happen, especially when they happen to you personally. And my daughter was pretty mission critical. She had something called petit mal's, which is a form of epilepsy. And so I think a lot of times people think about people falling and, down, and they're on the ground and they're convulsing and having seizures and things like this. And with her, it would be a little bit opposite of that, where she'd have daily seizures for that last between 8 and 15 seconds. And it was almost like you just unplug, and she was just almost like frozen. But during that time, she really couldn't see or hear. And then you're plugging her back in. She's, so like if a teacher is saying, and, Christopher Columbus is the one who sailed across and you miss the name of the answer, how difficult learning on those types of things would be, not to mention it was super fatiguing. So she was going to the University of Arizona. This has been going on for about 20 years. If she had 10 seizures a day, that was a win. And so I was just, at the time, parallel to that, and this was kind of the whole theme of my TED Talk, I was starting to get quite a bit of attention again from the NFL, which was crazy. And so rather than have it come on Amelia about my climb, I wanted to redirect that light to Amelia and pick a cause, so epilepsy or higher ground, to actually reshine that light on her to show the journey that she'd been on, and then try to raise money so we could help others with awareness and funds go to that cause.
Again, this is what this show is all about, is to inspire others to get off the sidelines and do something and take action and help others. You've talked about passion with purpose. How does philanthropy connect to peak performance, and what does service for someone who's trying to find their next mountain?
I think, like I was thinking about this the other day, just in terms of like yesterday, I would go out and part of my like routine and discipline is getting up at 5:30 in the morning, and I go out the door every single morning. I work out for an hour and a half. And there's a lot of days that I don't feel like doing that, but discipline has to override feelings, right? But there's never been a time when I've come back and said, I'm going to draw a parallel here. There's never been a time when I've come back and said, God, I wish I wouldn't have done that workout. You're always saying, I'm so glad I did that workout because you didn't feel like doing it. You got over that. You held yourself accountable. You were disciplined about it. And then you accomplished it. And now you're feeling better about it. Okay. So the same thing about giving back, right? There's no greater joy than not only helping others to raise money, to then actually have an event where, and I'm not saying it's everything that I did personally, but because of a sequence of things that happened along the way for Amelia in this 20-year journey, that ultimately she's now the last 4 years, she's been seizure-free, living in New York City, assisted with meds, right? It was miraculous. And I think there was some element in there, a part of it, when I held these different fundraisers here, which, by the way, takes a lot of flipping effort. I filled church twice with 300 people. And I had, Jim Moore up on stage with me, Peter Cetera, the Chicago frontman.
Chicago, yeah, of course.
He was up there with me, and some other, rock stars that were part of this that helped, bring people into the church. And then I interviewed them like you're doing with me. And then we created this thing. And to have not only people feel great about coming towards the cause and giving, but then actually see the person that we're talking about, my daughter, get up on stage and have her rise up a little taller, get a little bit more confident, and just admit that she's got this thing that we're all trying to collectively help put our arms around to help her. Also, when I was down, and I mentioned this before, down in the Serengeti with Chris Long, Howie Long's son, and we climbed Kilimanjaro and also raised this money, and we went to these villages, and these people celebrated us like we were the Beatles, the Elvis coming into their village. I mean, they were like, oh my God, are you kidding me? These are, and they were making robes for us and necklace things, and it was just amazing to see their happiness and their joy when they were coming together and somebody else did something for them. And it's like, we're happy to do that. And they're happy that we're able to, they've got the saying down there called water is life. And that's so important because it's so dry. And, the other side of that is that typically these girls would have to walk down to the water 5 miles away with these big buckets on their head and come back and being attacked and all kinds of messy stuff. It was just really gratifying, satisfying, and so much fun to see other people, by the effort that you do. So kind of like that workout thing I was talking about, there hasn't been a time when I've participated in something like that where I haven't come back and go, God, that felt great. And it was so awesome to be around those people, and they actually inspired me to do more.
What's funny? Most people that I talk to on this show that have similar mindsets to you is that they feel like, and this is the way I feel as well, they feel like they get more out of the experience than the people that they are intending to help. Yeah. And I think if people just realized that there's more to be gained from contributing to the benefit of others than just the satisfaction, but you also gain love, you gain experience, you gain an esteem that you get from this for yourself to make it so that it's so meaningful that, it's just amazing how that little thing and that tipping point you can do for others just makes you feel like you're on the top of the world using your summit as an experience.
Yeah. And, it's been fun too, because the gift keeps giving, sort of, in a way that I'm able to continue to give, but also because I've been able to be in so many places. My first Kilimanjaro, I refer back to the Boys and Girls Club. I raised some money. I didn't even really know what I was doing. It was my first summit. I went down and raised $10,000. It's not the most and it's not the least, but again, it was just kind of my first step into this. And then when I saw Chris Long, he's really taken this whole building water wells all over East Africa to a whole different level, right? Not just one little group. And then when it hit home, and that's when it really, there's parents out there there's kids have had all kinds of issues and, cancer and whatever else, and it affects you. And when it got mission critical for Amelia, there was really no other choice than it just was obvious. Like, let's just call this whole thing Amelia's Everest, not Mark's Everest, but Amelia's Everest. Yeah. And what can we do towards really bringing the NFL even donated? It was so cool. Right. So it was just really starting to bring them back. And it was really a full circle moment for me. And just to see, kind of the whole arc and the people that you meet and just keep problem solving and how you can get there, great things can happen.
Yeah, for sure. Let's shift gears again and go talk about your book, Finding Your Summit. It became a #1 Amazon bestseller. What's the core message you want a reader to take away, especially one who feels stuck right now?
Yeah, so, there's two types of, I think, speakers or writers or people that come with advice, right? And one is they've read all these books, and so they're talking about what everybody else has done, right? Overcome certain things. An amazing speaker, amazing game changers, a guy like Tony Robbins, who's somebody, he's not the doer. He's so good at retelling stories of other people. I'm the opposite of that, which is not that I can't tell a good story, but all these things that I talk about in this book are my own experiences, and I've had a lot of them. Like you said, taking SI from 17 to #1, playing in the NFL, and it was not a smooth ride at all for me. I was.
It never is.
I was drafted, I was cut, I was traded, I was brought back, I was all those things, right? And it's so hard to make an NFL team. It's even harder to stay there, right? Because all these new guys are coming in. And climbing the 7 summits, but, relationships, right? My daughter, Amelia, things like that. I've had a lot of different setbacks. So I have been very, 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 very fortunate. And I think this is one of the biggest missing components and pieces in business today, which is the leadership piece. We all go to college. Many of us go to college and we learn, how to create spreadsheets and budgets and marketing or social media or whatever your thing is going to be, but they're never teaching about the leadership component. And I think, not only is it a top down from leaders like who have gone on to really understand about that, but also bottom up, top down and bottom up, people that once they kind of get going in the system, turning around and helping others, that are below them. And so you get this whole ecosystem going. And there's a major lack of that, I think, that's out there. And so fortunately for me, between Don James, who is a Hall of Fame coach, he taught me this pyramid of success, which I've really taken to heart. And it's really just a 25 different building block on how I got there. And so one of the things I talk about, like I'm talking about tonight for Harvard, is, who created this whole thing was John Wooden. You and I both know who John Wooden is, especially, right? And so he was the famous basketball coach, and he won 10 NCAA championships in a row. My coach won a couple of national titles at Washington. He taught me the same system that he took from, and then a guy that's more relevant today is Nick Saban. Nick Saban, the coach of LSU and in Alabama, won 7 national titles. That's impossible. So if you put those 3 together, and so when I'm talking about how I've dug myself out multiple times, we're talking about the exact same system I'm using that these guys have won 20 national championships with. In that case, I'm retelling somebody else's story, but I'm implementing for my own life on what I've done, and the flipping thing works. And that's the reason why when you start talking about playing in the NFL, taking SI from 17, #1 past ESPN, writing this book, that debuted on #1, how to overcome the life's valleys and peaks with faith and resilience, and things like that, they're so different. And I keep ending up back here at the top. It's because I've used the same system and I've worked it. And you have to have the faith and the belief that, and the patience that if you believe in the system and if you believe in the daily discipline of the things that you're applying, that over time it can get you to, or at least put you in the best position to succeed on something else.
Yeah, I mean, in the most simplistic terms, this is something I live by every day. There's the old Zen saying, chop wood, carry water. Yeah. I mean, and ultimately, if you do If you follow a system and you work it and you don't quit that system, especially a good system like the Pyramid of Success, you're going to get there. You just have the patience and the mindset that it's going to happen for you.
I'll tell you a story. The other thing too, that I'm telling you, it's the only difference between myself and so many others, because I can tell you I'm not that talented and I'm not that smart, but I have the absolute relentless mindset to keep going and not quit and not draw excuses and not say, well, tomorrow morning I'll, do double workout or whatever, and have this same system and being in this wheel. And that's so part of what there's a reason, and having a positive attitude. That attitude, there's the one thing that you can't help how tall you are or how fast you can run or how smart you might be, but there's one thing you can control is that attitude. And if you show up every day with that great attitude, man, it's infectious. People want to be around it. They can feel it. And great things can happen because you've got a positive mindset about certain things, but you have to also apply that relentless daily discipline of whatever you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah. Mark, you originally planned to launch the 7 Summits this fall, and you and I had this discussion earlier about the fact that it didn't quite play out the way you intended. It was supposed to be a leadership summit built around principles that drove your journey. Who was it originally designed for, and what did you intend people to get out of this, and how did you learn from the experience of it not kind of playing out the way you wanted?
Yeah, well, I think what it was intended for is I've been all over the world, of course, and I've climbed in all these different crazy places, not just the 7 summits, but the Matterhorn and the Eiger and Mont Blanc and Cotopaxi and all these other ones. And I keep seeing a lot of people that are out searching for something else, and there's got to be something more, right? And so I had brought in and got commitments from amazing people. The guy is a Top Gun pilot for the Blue Angels. I got Mary Hemingway and others. And at the end of the day, it just didn't quite get there. But it was just, I think that we're all in search a lot of times for, there's got to be just more than this. Maybe you've been in the same job for the last 20 years and, it works and everything, but you're asking yourself, is this it? Is this all I got? And so, it was originally intended to really help people think a little bit differently and come together and network and get that social community together and climb and things like that. But it just didn't quite come, together. But through one door shutting, another one usually opens. And so, so it's just so that didn't work. That's cool. This is just another, I wouldn't call it a huge valley or anything, but it's just one of those things that we couldn't pull it off. So we just pivot now and go in a new direction.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's what it's all about, though, is resilience and getting feedback, finding new ways to repackage and repurpose. And I think that's really admirable that you find that it didn't work the way you intended, but you're not giving up on the concept of helping others. And that's, again, what this show is all about, is to celebrate making a difference for others.
Yeah, well, part of that is I'm taking that one step down. I'm starting a coaching business, which I've been indirectly coaching people for a long time. When I was running Sports Illustrated, which I just stepped away 6 months ago, and took them to over 1 billion page views, and are really empowered. If you can imagine, I had over 300 publishers creating content for various teams that we assigned them to, and not one person was on a salary, not one. And what we did is we rev shared with them. And so for me, it was daily coaching of all these different people. And I help make a lot of people a lot of money just because I've spent so much time researching my subject and really understanding what moves the needle on a hot domain like sportsillustrated.si.com. And that's exactly what happened. And so I'm going to take that internally and try to help people grow their own businesses that are out there.
Well, speaking of helping and speaking of giving people inspiration, for anyone listening who feels like they've hit a plateau professionally, personally, or otherwise, what's the first real step you'd tell them to take?
Action. Any step is a good step. And you got to be committed to it. But I think that's one thing. Let's go back to your first question of the day, which is like, okay, you played, all these years in the NFL, and then what? and then what was I felt myself stuck. And there's no more frustrating position than when you feel stuck. And even if you do something that you don't want to do, at least you're taking a step in some direction that's going to make you decide, do you want to keep going? Do you want to stop? Or do you want to pivot? And that's the biggest thing more than anything, because procrastination is just the killer of just being out there and that go-getter, mentality, and really help you unlock, what's going to be next.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Mark, where can your audience find you and follow your journey and connect with your work?
Yeah, come and reach out to me anytime, but www.markpattisonnfl.com. All my socials are Mark Pattison NFL. Pretty easy to find me. I respond to everybody. Love to help anybody who needs help.
That sounds great. We've come to the end of the show. It's been great talking to you. I want to really thank you. You could have let adversity define you, and instead you used it as a base camp. I really love that kind of aspect of where you've gone. The mountains, the documentary, the foundation work for Amelia, the book. I mean, every chapter of your story is proof that legacy is built not in the highlight reel, but in the climb. It's the journey, as they say, right?
Yep.
So I know our listeners are going to walk away from this conversation thinking bigger about their own summits. We'll link to the website and the socials and your book and everything in the show notes. I really appreciate you coming on. I'm Alan Pavlosky, and this has been another episode of the Legacy All-Stars podcast, where we celebrate people who use their success to lift others higher. Thank you for coming, Mark.
Thank you so much.